Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We are super excited to welcome you to our webinar talking about how to share your story in your medical school application. We are going to wait a couple of minutes just to give everyone time to log into our session. We really appreciate you being with us here. I know some of you are probably on spring break, and we're excited that you're here. Before we get officially started, I'd just like to go ahead and give you a little bit of a sense of who's presenting in the group today. So I am here representing a College of Medicine. I'm Layla Miri, the Associate Dean for Admissions. On our panel, we also have Ms. Anya Cruz, who is a Senior Pre-Health Advisor at the University of Illinois, Chicago. She's here with us today because she advises a very large, broadly and deeply diverse group of pre-health students. And so she's here to share her wisdom with you. We also have Jake Aisi, who's a first-year medical student at the Robert Larner College of Medicine at the University of Vermont. Jake is here to share his story about how he navigated the pre-med process and what it was like for him now that he's a first-year medical student. And finally, last but not least, we have Ms. Tyra Lee Brittpool, who is a current pre-health student at the University of South Florida. And she's going to share with you her why for medicine and how she plans to share her story in the application process. Okay, so we're a couple minutes in, and I will go ahead and get us started. So again, as I mentioned, I am Layla Miri. I'm the Associate Dean for Admissions at the Robert Larner College of Medicine. And I'm here today to share with you how medical admissions committees and medical schools really think about the story of an applicant as they review the application. So obviously we start with the MCAS application. That's where you all are sharing the information about yourself, what you've done, and how it is that you are here as a medical student, as a pre-med student, and as an applicant to our medical school. Personal statement is of pivotal importance. I know that you will hear differently from different schools, but focus on the schools where the personal statement is very important for them. So for us, the personal statement is your why. Why is it that medicine is the only career for you? And really, when a student comes to our medical school and they're interviewing with us, we don't ask them why medicine, because the question about why medicine has been answered fully in the personal statement. So help us understand why it is that medicine is the only career that makes sense for you and how you've navigated up to this point and you've eliminated other things that really don't make sense in your life. Experiences section is also important. When you tell us in your personal statement about your why and who your target is for the groups that you wish to help and advocate for with your career in medicine, then we want to know that you've had the experiences that have informed that. So medical schools are pretty open about sharing with you what they are looking for in the application. So let us know what the experiences are that you've had. That helps us understand your story because it shows us where your impetus was, what you've done to fulfill that need to understand more about medicine. Then if you think about it a little bit more, this year, we were fortunate to have the other impactful experiences as part of the MCAS application. For my committee, that's of ultimate importance. It allows the applicant to share with us experiences that they've had in their life that may not in their mind directly relate to their decision to pursue medicine, but completely informs us of their lived perspective and the lived experiences that they are going to bring to the table. So for some students, it's, family experiences that they've had. For some students, it's travel that they've done. For some students, it's hardship. For other students, it's enriched experiences that they've had. So take full advantage of that piece to help us contextualize you as a person coming into our institution, right? Not as a person who can do science, not as a person who can do math, not necessarily as a person who's going to be an outstanding physician, but as a human that's going to be there at our medical schools. The next place that we will look for is in your biographical data. So did you have siblings or not? What type of education did your parents have? What part of the world or the country are you from? Your biographical information is very important for us. So be as clear as you can be. Some of those categories are not required, they're optional, but the more information that the committee has, the more aware they are. So I've talked to students who are uncomfortable sharing that their parents were physicians because they think somehow that's going to hurt their application. Why would it hurt your application? We know that you have lived firsthand experiences of what it's like to grow up in a family that there is a physician. So you understand the dedication and the commitment that's there. On the other hand, if you let us know that you are from a family where you're the first in your family to go to school, you're the first in your family to pursue medicine, you may be the first in your family to pursue medicine in the US. Those pieces are all important for us. Committees will look at it differently, but regardless of how they look at it, it helps us understand you better. Then the secondaries, I cannot emphasize the secondaries enough. The secondaries are specific to each institution. Take your time. Take your time and help us imagine you at our school. So what I ask my pre-med students that I talk to is, imagine yourself at my school. What would that look like? What would that feel like? What do I have here that makes sense for you? That would make sense for you to be here rather than at a different institution. So in the secondary application also, your story unfolds for us. It's this continuum, right? The entirety of this application is a continuum of lived experiences and understandings that you've acquired over the however many decades that you are when you're applying to us that helps us understand the why and the who. And finally, letters of recommendation. Letters of recommendation are so important, and this letter gives us some additional information about you that we didn't have until that point. So the letters of recommendation should be solicited from individuals that know you well, and that gives us information that we didn't know about you before. And after we're done reading everything, the letter gives us additional information that makes us love you even more as an applicant, as a potential student at our school. So as you see, everything that you submit to us in writing helps you tell your story. So I'm not going to take any more of your time. I am going to hand it over to our first expert, Jake, who will share with you how he shared his story.
Thank you for that, Dr. Amiri. My name is Jake Aisi. I am a first-year medical student here at the University of Vermont, Larner College of Medicine. I have my bachelor's in kinesiology from UMass Amherst, and I got my master's from Boston University. I am Ghanaian American. I'm the first in my family to be born in the US, and I chose medicine after one of my family members was diagnosed with diabetes. I learned some of the complications that she had from that diagnosis, and that kind of opened the path of medicine for me. One of the big things I want to share with all of you is that your story is unique. I already mentioned that my family member's diagnosis is what attracted me to medicine, and everyone's situation will be different. Whether yours is also a diagnosis or yours is you've always wanted to be a doctor since you were a child, that is unique to you and that should be shared. That shouldn't be hidden. Also, what your journey was like is very important. I use the AMCAS application almost like a job interview. If you go to a job interview, they'll always ask, tell me about yourself. And I think it's a dreaded question for most people unless you're prepared. So the good thing is you have months to prepare this application, and you should be ready to share what your journey was, whether it was long or short. Share some positives, some negatives that may have come throughout this journey. And if you do share negatives, I think it's pretty important to make sure you talk about what you've gained and how you built off of that experience. One of the core competencies, and if you're not familiar with the AAMC's core competencies, I would definitely take a look, but is resiliency and adaptability. So that's a good way to build off of any negatives that may be there. Also, a big part of your journey is, or your story, is what is unique to you. I know in my application, I personally talked about my time in sports. I talked about learning the guitar when I was younger, and that was all part of my story. And if that is meaningful and impactful to you, I do think that is something that admissions committees do want to see, and it's important to share that. And the way I wrapped up my personal statement personally was, where do you want to go? Where do you want this journey to go? I wrapped it up with goals and aspirations and why I can only accomplish those by being a physician. Whether it's a specialty you want to go into or advocacy work that you want to do, that is something that should be said, and that is a big part of your story. And a little disclaimer, your story is told through your application. It's not just told through your personal statement. So even though you have a character limit, don't try to fit everything into that personal statement. As Dr. Amiri mentions, it's a long application. It's a holistic process too. So they'll be able to see grades, they'll be able to see data about you, and then you have the chance to expand on everything you've experienced personally.
Thank you so much, Jake. And I forgot to mention that we'll have time for Q&A at the end of our presentations. But please put your questions in the Q&A and we will address them.
And lastly, thinking about everything you've experienced, I know for me, it was really hard to gather everything I've done, whether that was volunteering or just stuff that I've done in my journey. So if you have time before you apply, I would say try to keep a log of everything you've done. If you have it relatively quickly, if you're going to apply, I would say really sit down and reflect on all the experiences you've had. And when you do share those experiences, don't just show and tell. You really want to make sure that you talk about how it impacted you and what you gained. So you can state what you did, what your role was, but really make sure you do talk about what you gained from that experience. I would say lean into strengths, don't hide your weaknesses. Your strengths are going to be apparent in your applications, and that'll be seen. So lean into that. And unfortunately, your weaknesses might be just as apparent. So if you have low shadowing hours, I would say talk about that and talk about in the little shadowing hours that you did have, you did gain XYZ, or the physician you shadowed maybe worked at a academic institution and he's mentored plenty of people. So you gained so much in the little hours that you had that you felt confident that you know what role a physician plays. And lastly, I would say do not be humble. I don't say this to tell you to be arrogant or just list all your accolades, but this is your opportunity to tell medical schools who you are, what you've done, what you've accomplished. So this is, in my opinion, the quite literal best time to list out everything you have and show them who you are.
Thank you so much, Jake. Okay, Tyra Lee, you're up.
Hi everyone, my name is Tyra Lee Britt Poole. I know that's a mouthful. I am a pre-medical student, so I am normally watching this with you. This is a first for me to be on this side of the panel. I will be applying to medical school next year, so get ready to wish me luck. I want to dive in today a little bit about, what my story is and how I plan to highlight that in my application and what I've learned along the way. So this is not a Floridian accent, even though I go to USF. I am a South African immigrant. I immigrated here to pursue medical school. Little did I know what that was going to entail, coming from a third world country. And I moved here just before the pandemic with 2 suitcases, and that was my entire life. And I was lucky enough to survive through the pandemic with my family, and we started building everything together. And slowly again, in that time, I was able to start at Hillsborough Community College. So I'm a community college alumni. If any of you are, that's amazing. And a first generation student. So I was really navigating this path on my own and not very well, I think, at the beginning. But coming to these kinds of sessions is what helps. What I want to talk to you today a little bit is about, how I'm planning to tell you those boxes, right? Those identities that make who I am. And in ways I'm going to do that, I can't just list my achievements, right? I can't just list everything I've done as a job description or, some kind of CV, because that way they're not going to get to know who I truly am and how I got to this point. So I really want to convey my journey very authentically, right? Really allowing them to connect to who I am as a person so that they can see who I'm going to be as a doctor. So you want to show them your true self and not try and give them what you think they want, right? That's not a school I want to go to. I want to go somewhere where the school sees me and goes, this person is a good fit for us. And that's my true self. So kind of how I'm going to do that. The first one we spoke about was a personal statement, the why medicine, right? Why medicine, I really dive into. I was an athlete. That was my first exposure. I have been lucky enough to work for a company called MAPT and Medical School HQ, which has helped me start to understand how to go through the personal statement. And what they always say is, you should have a seed, right? What was your seed? And my seed was being an athlete. And then how did I water that seed, right? And I talk about the experiences that truly highlighted my passion for medicine. I didn't pick some of the cooler ones for my personal statement, but I picked the ones that were really authentically the time when I was like, wow, this is for me, right? So going and demonstrating your passion and not just like showing them what you've done and that you're going to be a good doctor, right? Like I learned communication, I learned research. That's not what they want to know, right? They kind of expect us to be learning these things. They want to know who you are as a person. And my journey and my personal statement doesn't speak too much about me as an immigrant and growing up in a third world country because I'm answering the question specifically why medicine. So I'm going to use the other impactful essay to truly talk about what it was like growing up in a third world country, what experiences were like living in droughts with no electricity and violence and crime that we encountered. So truly being able to connect to them in that regard, but also then helping them see why I got involved in the activities I did. Because I got involved with underrepresented groups because they were meaningful to me, and I want to show that reason. And lastly, in the activity section, not writing a job description. I know we've all done really cool things, and we want to tell them all about everything we've done. But really, they want to understand why you did it and what you took away from it. How did spending all that time doing this work actually impact you? A big part of who I am outside of the clinical is social justice and advocacy work. I love using my voice to advocate for patients and peers. I've done that on a national level, sitting in a board position at the American Medical Student Association. And I've done that on a campus level as well, starting initiatives like shadowing programs for underrepresented students. And I want my school to see the stuff I'm doing and be excited that I could come to their school and continue to do work like this, right? So really highlighting who I am so when I get accepted into their medical school, they know who I'm going to be and what I'm going to want to do in those 4 years. So that's kind of how I'm going to walk about it. And I hope that that helps you. And we'll go through some more questions later and we can talk a bit more about it.
Thank you so much, Tyralee. All right, Ms. Cruz, we hand it to you.
Hello, I am so excited to be here. My name is Anya Cruz. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a senior pre-health advisor at the University of Illinois, Chicago, which obviously is in Chicago, Illinois. I wanted to start off by letting you know, you can go ahead and go to the next one, but that this is an incredibly overwhelming and intimidating process, and it is okay to be scared. Completely normal. It should be scary. This is a big deal. This is like the rest of your life, right? You are not alone. You have pre-health advisors at your institutions. There's also help from professors and other individuals who have gone through this before. So remember that you're not alone and that it's intimidating and it's okay. You're going to be all right. Through the process, you want to make sure that you're putting yourself in the center of this whole process and that you're putting yourself in the center of why do you want to be a physician and why do you want to help people? You don't just want to say you want to help people. We all know that, but you want to think about how are you learning how to help others, and how have you lived out that truth in your life, and what actions are you putting forth to live that out, and how are you going to talk about that? And we are talking about that in your application. You want to be incredibly specific, and you want to show what you did, and you want to show what you learned, and you want to show how this is going to help you be a strong physician into the future. In order to remember all of these things that you're doing, I want you to journal and reflect and reflect and reflect. And I want you to write down what you do, think about what you've already done, think about what you're doing now. Not only is this going to help you when you're filling out that activities list, it's also going to show you your story and that arc of who you are and why you want to do this. When you're doing that, I want you to write it down with your hand on an actual piece of paper, because the act of writing it down is going to help you learn from those experiences. And it's also going to help you remember exactly what you did. And all of that is going to be useful for when you're sitting down and you're filling out that application. If there's anything particularly transformative that happened on some day when you were volunteering or some event that you were at, write that down. You're going to think that you're going to remember it because it was so amazing. 3 months are going to pass and you're not going to remember it. So remember to write down those specific things, even those mundane things. You've been volunteering at the same place for quite some time. You've built up your hours. That maybe isn't all that exciting, write that down too, because even those mundane pieces, you're going to see a story and you're going to be learning from that. And you're going to be learning, why is it that I want to do this? Even if it's not an exciting day volunteering in the hospital, this is still really important that I'm here. And all that reflection and all that writing are going to come into play when you go back and you see everything that you've done. Everything on your journey is important. Everything that you do is important. And that, I think, is something that you should absolutely take away, particularly from what Jake and Tyra Lee have been saying. Everything that you do is important, and you go into the center of that story. Throughout your application, you do not want to lose an opportunity to provide more information on who you are and where you've come from and how your story has developed over your time. So any question, even if it's optional, I don't want you to leave it blank. I want you to make sure that you're putting some information in there to give really a third dimension to who you are, because that's how the people who are reading your application are going to know your true story. You want to make sure that that true story goes into the application, because without that true story, you're not going to get that right fit. And the medical schools aren't going to be able to accurately assess who you are and if you will be a good fit at their institutions. So remember to be super specific in everything that you're doing and in everything that you're writing down. Show what you did, show what you learned, and show how that's going to help you be a strong physician into the future. Reflect, reflect, reflect. Don't be in a rush. I work with a lot of students who want to rush through this process, and rushing is not a good idea. You want to make sure that you're slowing down and you're doing everything in your time frame. There is no late. There is no early, there is no perfect journey to med school. Everybody's journey is going to look completely differently, and that's okay. And that journey could also mean that you are working. It could mean that you are helping take care of family. It could mean that you've been spending so much time in your academics throughout the time in undergrad that you haven't had an opportunity to really build up those extra activities. And that's also okay, because that's your journey. And then you're going to take some time after you graduate to build up those activities and to have that strong application. Some of you, like Tyra Lee, might be starting off at a community college and then transferring to a four-year institution. That isn't a weakness, that's a strength, because you're going from one place to the next. You're showing how you've grown, you're showing how you are impacted by that change in rigor, and then you're moving forward on your journey academically and also personally. So reflection, reflection, be as specific as possible. Don't lose an opportunity to talk about how amazing you are, and always having that thread of your why and why that's kind of bringing you to medical school, into a career and a life as a physician. Those are the things to remember to keep in the center and to keep right there when you're stressed out, right? Because this is intimidating and this is stressful. Jake kind of touched a little bit about this when he was talking about the activities list. You don't want to repeat anything from the activities list in your personal statement. All that data information goes into the activities list, along with what you did, what you learned, as much space as you can use there. And then in that personal statement, that's where you really put in those anecdotes, and the showing and the specifics about that experience, not necessarily just the data. And just make sure that you're taking advantage of all the opportunity to put in everything that you've done. Some of you might have done so much that it doesn't all fit in the application. And that's okay, because then you can kind of pick and choose. This is going to go into my activities list, and then I'm going to save this for my personal statement. Maybe I'll save this for some of the secondaries, because this is really connected specifically to that institution. And that is about that. So just take some deep breaths and take care of yourself through this process, because it's not just a big application, it's a big life-changing decision. And you're going to need to take some naps.
Thank you so much, Anya, and thank you to all our panelists. Really, I've learned so much from listening to the three of you. Okay, so we have a bunch of questions in the Q&A, and we're going to do our best to answer them as much as possible. So Anya, I'm going to throw the first one your way. Should I tell medical schools about my troubled childhood, drugs, illegal activities, etc., even though this may look bad? It's a big driving force that led me to go to college and further approach a career in medicine.
I think that's a really great question. And I think that it depends on how much you want to talk about that. I think if that's your why and that's your spark, I think that it needs to be into that application somewhere. If there's any like legal action or any kind of, I can't remember the word, but you'll think of what this is I'm trying to say, Dr. Miri. If you got into trouble in undergrad, or if you got into trouble in the real world, that's going to come out. So you don't want to say, no, nothing has ever happened to me, because when they do the background check, they're going to find out. So I think being as open and honest as possible, especially if that was your why and that was your spark for starting on this journey, then I think that that is something that you want to make sure you keep in the center of that application.
I have a real live example of a student who we admitted at one of the schools where I've worked, who did have a little bit of a troubled background, and that was the reason for them going into medicine. And they have genuinely carried through with that desire to help others who may be in those types of situations. So I think what you heard from all of our presenters, and from me as well, was that we need to know about you. So share your story. Okay. So Jake, I'm going to ask this one of you. What are some good ways to get letters of recommendation? So the question here is when you're out of school, and I know you did some work after you graduated as well. So can you talk to us a little bit about that process?
Absolutely. One of the biggest things when looking for letters of recommendation for me personally was I would ask people I kind of surrounded myself with. So if you work with anyone outside of class, that's definitely someone I would put on the list for letters of recommendation. Even if it is just class, I would make sure you ask them specifically, can they write you a strong letter of recommendation? I have approached one of my professors and asked him if he could write me a strong letter of recommendation. And he honestly said, outside of class, we haven't interacted that much. So would you be willing to maybe work on one of these projects with me so I can get a better sense of who you are? And that way I can write a non-generic letter of recommendation. So I would say if you can find a list of people who you've worked with outside of class, go with that first, or ask them if they can have an opportunity for you to work with them so they can see who you are. I think that's definitely the most important. And that obviously comes with time too. Like if time has passed and elapsed, you might have to definitely take that into consideration, who are you truly strongest with.
Thank you so much, Jake. Tyra Lee, I'm going to give this one to you. So the question is, I don't know how to answer the why doctor, why medicine. I feel like admissions boards look for elaborate stories that show students are really determined to become doctors, and I just don't have one. I've enjoyed shadowing and truly enjoy helping people, but I feel I don't have a specific reason that could directly answer this question. And I'm asking you specifically because in addition to medicine, advocacy and social justice is really a big driving force for you. And so you've done a great job of weaving those together. Can you help us with this one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, your story is your story, number one. Yes, and you do hear people whose stories are, an illness of a loved one, or, a tragic accident that you might think sound flashy, you know, and maybe yours isn't, but that's okay because your why medicine isn't, you know, some traumatic experience in your life. It could just simply be, I was really interested in this field, so I started exploring. But then you have to make sure you are elaborating on why you were exploring it and what it made you feel while you were exploring it. I was an athlete. I never had a crazy injury or anything like that, but I loved the human body. And I loved working with athletes and seeing how the body would heal itself and how the body would push itself past its limits. So I highlight that kind of stuff. I speak very in depth about what that meant to me and why I was curious in it. And then in those watering events, I spoke about how I then found out all these other different parts of medicine. And I was like, this is where I need to be, right? I often get the question, oh, well, if you like advocacy, why don't you do that? Well, a physician is very multifaceted, and you can do many things in your medical school journey and being a physician that you can't do in any other careers, right? So even if it's coming from a place of being a teacher to a doctor, you wanted to be an educator in healthcare, being, you know, someone who came from a background with no physicians and you wanted to help your family. So just really reflect on who you are, why you are doing this. And if you have that good, solid reason, it will come out. Hope that helped.
Thank you, Tyra Lee. Anya, I'm going to give this one to you, and it's a compilation of several questions. So there's been questions from individuals who have had the word here is non-traditional. I heard someone say nonlinear, so I think I'm going to use nonlinear as well. They've had a nonlinear pathway. They've had other careers. They're career changers now. And so there's some concerns about presenting themselves. What general suggestion would you have for these applicants?
I love that. I love working with alumni who come in and have great stories about why they are interested in changing careers. I think that your why is so important, especially if you've done something for a while and maybe you've been bored. Maybe it just hasn't been as stimulating. Maybe you decided that you really are incredibly interested in, the human body or in medicine. And I think that that story is super, super important. I think if you've been out for a while and you haven't had any academics, then maybe it's time to kind of tip your toe back in so that you can get those strong letters of recommendation. They can talk about you as you and your academics and as a student, and then they can also talk about you and your why for wanting to switch careers at that point too. Getting shadowing is going to be really key. Getting some experience is going to be really key because you're going to have to be able to really articulate your why. And that articulation is probably going to be a lot stronger with that experience that you're bringing in than it would have, maybe for you right out of undergrad. So I think that that's a really big strength. And I don't think that you should think of yourself as being behind or it's not going to work, because it will and it could. And that why and that journey to that point is really important. Make sure that you're talking about that.
If I'm going to ask this one of you, then I may go to Tyra Lee and Anya as well, and I've got some thoughts on this one too. I've seen a lot of examples where the introduction has an anecdote, is written in a story-like way. Is this something you would recommend or not recommend? What are your thoughts about that?
My personal thoughts, it does kind of come into your personality. So for me, writing style, I prefer to write creatively, and it definitely also comes from a place of sciencey research. Is just so, I don't want to say mundane, but it's so structured that this is my opportunity to tell about myself in a story-like manner. So my own personal statement was story-like. It did kind of jump to different points in my life, but it was cohesive as a whole. I would say if you go anecdotal or story-like, don't lose sight of what you're trying to accomplish in the why medicine. I think it's very easy to do that or just start to list things off. That's not the goal. So personally, and it's from person to person, I would say I enjoy story-like personal statements.
Great, thank you, Jake. What do you think, Tyra Lee? Do you agree?
I'll jump in because I'm actually the opposite. I am not a storyteller kind of person, right? I am very the logical mind. I also have a sense of humor that comes from a different country. So fear of being misinterpreted in some kind of anecdote is what I was worried about. So mine is very, you know, here's who I am, here's what I've done kind of thing. I do not start with the birds were chirping and the sun was shining. To me, I needed more characters to actually dive into my reflection than I did a story. So I think that was kind of mine. So again, who are you? Because you want to be your authentic self. So I don't want to tell a story if it seems weird and fake, because it's going to come across weird and fake. But if Jake's a great storyteller and tells a story that they connect to, he will then show that, right? So it's about who you are.
That, and I'm so, we just got lucky with the two different perspectives on this continuum of including a story or not. And this is again, you sharing your story, right? So how you write the personal statement should be reflective of you as an individual. So I read a lot. And for those of you that read a lot, sometimes, I'm trying to figure out what would it be like if I met this author? And that's kind of where I am when I'm reading the personal statement. The person that I want to meet is really the person that I read about in the personal statement. And if you're creative and quirky and that's your personality and that's who shows up and that's who we're expecting to see, it's really great. On the other hand, if that is not who shows up, but that's how the personal statement is written, there's a little bit of a disconnect there. And it can be harmful even though you've worked so hard to get to the point of interview. So make sure that your personal statement and all of your writing is truly reflective of you. Anya, talking about your own stories, there's a question here. Is it bad to tell about your own history of health issues in your personal statement? And if you wouldn't mind tagging onto this, we've had a couple of individuals who've talked about negative experiences that they've had in the healthcare field and how they're going to undo that, or how they've had negative health experiences and they've had to have physical therapy. So if you could just address that broadly.
That's a great question because it's kind of sensitive, right? So I think anything that goes into your application is going to potentially come up in an interview or in some other part of your application. So if you're not comfortable talking about something, if somebody asks you a question about an experience and you break down crying, then maybe that's not something that you want to highlight in your application or in your personal statement. But if it's also directly connected to your why and you're comfortable talking about it, then I think that it's okay to put it into that application. Just know that anything that you put in there in the personal statement and the activities list, somebody could ask you about it later on. I forgot what the second part of that question was. I'm sorry.
So the second part of it was if they've had bad experiences, can they talk about their bad experiences? And also I had a bad experience and now I had to do physical therapy, for example, to correct that. So the good part and bad parts.
Yes, thank you. I don't want you to highlight negatives overtly. I don't want you to always be talking about negative things. I don't want you to say, I shadowed a dentist and that was a horrific experience and all dentists are bad and that's why I want to be a physician. That's not what you want to do because then that's just highlighting the bad, right? We want you to highlight your positive story to wanting to come to be a physician. There's nothing wrong with bringing up negative things, particularly if it's connected to your why. I have a lot of students who speak multiple languages, and one of their really strong reasons for wanting to become a physician is because someone in their family or they themselves had a negative experience with a physician because of a language barrier or because differences in like cultural opinions and those sorts of things, and being completely dismissed just because they're from a historically underrepresented population. And that's okay if that's your why. You don't need to go off on a huge tangent and write your entire personal statement about that, because then you're not talking about yourself, you're talking about that one incident, and that is not about you and why you want to do this. So it's okay to talk about that a little bit, but don't just be harping on the negatives and don't just continue down that road. But it's okay if it's a piece of who you are and your why journey.
Thank you so much, Anya. Jake, this one comes to you particularly because you told folks to not be humble. So how do we find the balance between bragging and just highlighting your strengths? How do you do that? And Tyra Lee, that's coming to you as well, because both of you have a lot. Jake, you had a lot as you were coming in. Tyra Lee, you're going to have an outstanding application as you go forward. So how do you find that balance?
Advice that was given to me is almost like, is it LinkedIn worthy? So if anyone has LinkedIn, I would definitely highlight anything that you're willing to either put as experiences, or you would make a post about it. Hey, I just got back from X trip. I've learned X, Y, Z, and kind of navigating it that way, because it is a fine line. LinkedIn is almost like a bragging like social media network, but it's really just highlighting what you've done and accomplished. And it is a very hard thing to do. I would say most of us grew up around not talking about all of our strengths in that way, but this is your opportunity to let people who don't know you learn what you've done. So I think it's a very important thing to do.
Thanks, Jake. Carly?
Yeah, and I think, in it, there's a fine line between a humble brag and being like, hey, I was in the double AMC panel as a pre-med, right? Like, this is going to be one of mine on mine. But I don't have to say because I was the best pre-med, because that's not the case. But I can talk about how this was an exciting opportunity to share with peers and, reflect on things. So I think if you're trying to sell your skills, oh, I'm the face of the double AMC, oh, I'm just the greatest communicator, oh, that's when it's going to come off arrogant. But if you were just like, I got to do this opportunity, it was really exciting. Here's what I learned. Here were the questions I, wanted to address. I think that's where your authentic self comes off. And it's not a brag, it's what you did. And then you're just talking about how that made you feel. And I think that's important in your application. So definitely reflect, not just, I'm good at this.
Exactly. Thank you both. You nailed it specifically. I'm thinking about all the times that I've sat in admissions committees and how the experiences have kind of been similar, but the tone has been different. So if you're sharing what you lived, we can see that, right? But if you're telling us what you did was so fantastic, that's the part that you don't need to see. Allow others to talk about how great it was. Anya, I've got two for you, and I'm going to put them together because they're roughly the same. And so these are questions about individuals sharing things that they're passionate about, that they feel may have some kind of impact on the committee. So one was, how should I share my involvement in being involved in religious activities? If you're heavily involved in your walk with God or church activities. And in the same vein, but differently, is the individual who wrote, I'm really passionate about women's health. How do I write about, or should I write about abortion when it's such a hot topic here? And would that hurt chances of my application? So generally, it's these things that have become politically charged maybe in our environment, or people may have very strong personal perspectives. Really interested to see what advice you give your students, since I know you have everyone on that continuum.
We do. I have a lot of students who are really active in their religious community, whether that's church, mosque, temple. And I tell them if that is an important part of your identity, then that is something that you should feel comfortable talking about in your application. Also, it's telling your story. A lot of times why you want to help people is coming from that experience, coming from that lived experience, and also the volunteering that you're doing through those experiences. I don't want you to lose sight of that, especially if it's really connected to your why and the reasoning for wanting to help people and how you're living out that truth in your life, right? Of helping people and how you're learning to help people. In terms of the like women's health question, I think that it depends on where you want to go to medical school. Do you want to go to medical school in an institution that is going to be supportive of those beliefs that you have, or do you want to go to a medical school that might be antithetical to those beliefs? And my guess is you want to be somewhere where you're going to be confident and comfortable believing that and helping others in that way. And so I hope that you put anything that is really important to you into that application. If I wouldn't want you to just put like, I am this political like party in your activities list, because that's not going to get you anywhere. But I think if you're really active in some sort of organization, or if it's really directly connected to your volunteering roles or your leadership roles, then that absolutely should go in there, particularly because it's most likely something that you want to continue while you're in medical school and in a way that you want to help people once you are a physician.
Thank you so much, Anya. We have a question here about discussing your identity. Is it best to be more general about your ethnicity to prevent potential bias and or protect the admissions from having to discuss sensitive topics such as racism and healthcare disparities? I'm interested to see, well, Jake, you're done. You're already in med school. So Tyra Lee, what would you say to a peer who might ask you that question? And then Anya, I would like to see what your thoughts are about this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've done a statement about this and about, the affirmative action rulings that we've had and how committees actually look at who you are as a person. I think your ethnicity, your race, and what you've gone through is significantly important for the physician pipeline. I think that our committees should be reading those and going, wow, this is a phenomenal person. And identifying that difference, right? Identifying who you are. I will talk about the fact that I'm South African. I will talk about the advocacy work that I've done that can be controversial. I will talk about, the experiences I've had as a first generation or low income student, because I want them to truly understand that that's who I've been on this journey. So please, truly show who you are. And if the school doesn't let you in because of the school, you don't want to go there anyway, right? Committees, you want committees who are looking at you and going, this diversity is beautiful and this person is beautiful.
Thank you, Tyra Lee. Do you have any thought, Anya? Go ahead.
I absolutely agree. Anything that is important to you needs to be in that application so that you find a solid fit. I would say, in addition to that information with the SCOTUS decision coming down about affirmative action, the boxes that you check are out, so they can't be taken into consideration when your application is being read. So providing any opportunity to talk about yourself, like I was saying before, you do not want to lose an opportunity to talk about who you are and how that's important to you. Anything that you put into your application other than the check boxes, they can talk about and they can see that in the application, and that'll come into play when they're deciding whether you're a good fit or not. So I think that absolutely should be in there.
And I agree 100% from the medical school admissions perspective. There was a question here, and I won't read the full question, but the individual has shared that they are a survivor of sexual assault and they are passionate about women's health, which is understandable. So they want to know if they should put this in their personal statement or as part of their impactful experiences. I mean, this is a major experience that you've had in your life, and it's important for you to share that, and you need to decide where you want that to be. If that was, for example, the impetus behind your decision to pursue medicine, you may choose to have that in your personal statement. On the contrary, you may choose to put it in the impactful experiences because that gives us a lens through which we can look at everything that you've done. So either place will help. The impactful experiences doesn't really necessarily need to feed into why medicine. Impactful experiences helps us understand the context of you as a human. Your personal statement should tell us why medicine. So think about where that information would be more helpful to you, and also be aware that I think somebody mentioned this, that whatever you put on your application is fair game. So you may be invited to speak about that again in a school that maybe doesn't have a standardized MMI process. And is that something that you want to talk about or not, is something that I would ask you to think about. Okay, so let's see, we've got about 10 minutes left, a lot of questions, so we'll see how many more we can get in here. How much weight does the personal statement hold in the primary? Can it ameliorate non-ideal statistics? So why don't we start with that one? Anya, what do you think about that? What advice would you give to a student? Can a personal statement ameliorate stats?
I like the analogy of a three-legged stool. So I talk my students through three pieces of your application: your academics, your GPA, your MCAT, and everything else. And that personal statement goes into the everything else. And if you have a three-legged stool, every leg needs to be equally strong. Otherwise, it's going to fall apart. And I don't want your application to fall apart. I want you to get in. And so I don't want you to think that a strong personal statement is going to be the leg that holds that stool up all by itself. I think you need to be working on academics, activities, personal statement, and the MCAT all together so that you have a strong application.
Thank you. Tyra Lee, ChatGPT, go or no go? What do you think?
I've actually spoken to admission committee members about this topic, so really glad for the question. Basically, the question was, are you using it to elevate who you are? You know, are you using it to fake who you are? Because there's different parts. Are you using it because, like, I don't know how to do this? ChatGPT, here's some of who I am. What's a good things to talk about? And it spits out, hey, talk about, you know, the time you did this or the time you did that. I feel like people are going to start using it more and more. Use it as a writing tool like you would a person if you need to. I would use Grammarly rather for all the Grammarly stuff, but you never want ChatGPT to write you something fake or dishonest. If you're trying to make it sound a little bit better, okay, one way. But if you're writing something fake and the committee's going to pick up on it, that's a no-go. So as long as you're being authentic and it doesn't sound like a robot, don't use words that you don't even know what they mean, right? Like if you don't say it on a daily basis, don't use it in your personal statement or your activities. So that's kind of my idea.
Thank you, Kyrie. So Jake, I have a question for you. Of all the things that you did to lead up to applying to med school, how did you decide what you were going to include? And then the second part of that question is, did you ever decide not to include anything because you quote unquote anticipated including that in your secondary?
That is a very good question.
Yeah.
I would say to the second part, in terms of not including it to my application as expecting it would be addressed in the secondary, for the most part, not so much. Um, I did pre-write some of my secondaries, but I didn't know what every school would ask. So if something did relate to like maybe teamwork or something of that nature, I would have already hit that in maybe my experiences. So I would hope that they would realize, okay, I am a team player, but then I can expand on that because it's not going to be as restrictive in that secondary. And what was the first part of the question?
How did you decide of all these things that you had done, which ones to include?
Um, it kind of comes back to, I guess, the point of the session, your story. What do I feel like needs to be shared with admissions committees for them to see me as truly me? I want to say we kind of all touched on some degree of you don't want to go to a school that doesn't accept who you are, right? So make sure you tell your story. Don't use ChatGPT because it doesn't know who you truly are. So if you can't express, okay, this is me, take it or leave it, I would say just, I guess all that to say, include everything that you feel like they need to know about you. That's how I decided.
Looking at the time, I'm going to thank you all for participating and really thank our panelists for your time. So before we close out our session, I'm going to ask each of you to provide a key takeaway that you'd like our audience to have. And my goodness, look at how great you did. All the loves and claps that are coming up for you. So Tyra Lee, I'll start with you because you are in the pipeline. Anya, I will ask you to go next because you are the individual that bridges between the pathway to medicine and getting into med school. And Jake, you're there, and we'll ask for a takeaway from you as well. So Tyra Lee, we'll start with you.
Awesome. I'm going to steal this from a dean of admissions I heard this from, but it will never leave me. He said, you don't walk up to a stranger and go, what are you looking for in a relationship? I'll be that, right? So don't do that with medical school. Show who you are, follow your passions, pursue it relentlessly, don't tick boxes. Be you, show you, and get into a school that's going to appreciate you.
Thank you. Anya?
Beautifully said. I think you need to trust yourself and trust the journey. That journey might take longer than you think it's going to, and that is okay.
Excellent. And Jake?
Mine is going off of Anya's, and there is a purpose for all of this. Every step along the way, now I'm realizing, okay, this is why the MCAT was so important. You need to be able to handle this rigor. Okay, this is why being able to write was so important because of this certain reason. So each step is analyzed and prepared somewhere along your journey. So do trust the process because you'll need it in the end and you will make it at the end.
Thank you so much to all of you. And I guess my piece of advice will be what everyone has said, which is to be true to yourself And we want to see that you've learned, right? We had a lot of questions about low stats, low grades, all of that. Do you need to explain them or not? Hopefully you will in the application. But remember, what we're interested in, who is going to show up at our medical school. So be yourself without any concerns. And we wish you all the best in matriculating into the school that's going to appreciate you as a med student. Have a great day, everyone, or enjoy the rest of your day. It's pretty late in the day for us now. Bye-bye.